So welcome everyone. We are going to get started. Thank you all so much for joining, for sharing all the places you are from, where you work, and also your practices, how in the midst of a very intense time in our country, how you are living your values and an intense time in the world. Welcome to the third of 6 webinars on the topic of transformative movement building. This is a collaboration between the Movement Strategy Center and Move to End Violence. My name is Mimi Ho, and I'm the co-director at Movement Strategy Center, and I will be your MC today. We are very excited to present this series. Movement Strategy Center has been a longtime partner of the Move to End Violence. The Move to End Violence is a program of the Novo Foundation that aims to strengthen leaders, organizations, and the movement as a whole, working to end violence against all girls and women. Over the years of this partnership, we have informed and shaped each other's work and learned with many of you who are on this webinar. This series is an opportunity to share this work with all of you and anyone that is interested in how to build powerful movements for social change. We hope that these webinars will introduce some shared language and concepts and help spark more conversations about the kind of movement we need and how we'll get there. So our webinar series is a 6-part series. We've had one that's an overview, the second one was on vision and purpose, and you can see today is on deep embodiment through practice. We will have a few more, so please be sure to join us for the upcoming ones. In these webinar series, we are talking about transformative movement building. And by transformative movement building, we mean movement building that shifts the way we think, our structures, shifts systems, the way we live, and even who we are. Movements have an incredible capacity for touching us at all those levels, and that is the kind of scale of movement that our world needs today. Today's webinar, we will offer specific strategies to help us embody our vision and purpose. When we say embodiment, we mean physically. We will explore how we can tune into the sensations in our bodies to notice our own personal habits, our movement habits, and to help cultivate specific movement capacities. We will also explore embodiment as a metaphor for how we can act in a way that aligns with our core values. Today, our learning objectives are to understand the strategic necessity of living our values and how this helps us get where we want to go. It's not just theoretical values, but how we live it now. We're going to introduce the difference between unconscious habits and conscious practices that help us access new capacity. And we will explore principles of forward stance and how they can be used to create transformative movements. Before we get started, however, I want to just do a few quick housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, and you will be able to request the link on the Move to End Violence website in the next day or so. If you are on social media, you can use the hashtag Transformative Movements, one word. We've also reserved some time for question and answer towards the end, but even along the way through this webinar, there are other ways for you to participate if you're connected through the webinar platform. In the upper left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a couple of options. Q&A, this allows you to ask a question directly of the panelists. Throughout the webinar, we will keep an eye on these and lift up these questions during our question and answer at the end. Also, as many of you have discovered, there's a chat function, and you can use this feature to communicate in real time with everyone on the webinar. Do make sure that you'll set your chat to everyone. Go ahead and go to the blue bar and click on it and set it to everyone. This way you can speak to everyone on the panel. Also, if you have technical difficulties, you can put any difficulties there or send a note to all panelists. So today, our agenda, we are very, very lucky to have Nan Stoops of the Washington Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and Cristy Chung, who is a longtime movement builder for the movements to end gender-based violence. They will be sharing their stories that help illustrate how embodiment practices can play a role in movement building, and they'll be sharing their personal stories as well. First, however, we are going to hear from my dear colleague at the Movement Strategy Center, Jeremy Lahoud. He is a leader in Movement Strategy Center's youth organizing work. He's also a master at capoeira and a forward stance trainer. Jeremy will give us some context about working with embodiment in transformative movement building. So pass it to Jeremy. Welcome.
Thanks, Mimi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks, wherever you are. I'm really happy to be here. A little background on myself and how I came into the practice of embodiment. So I came into social justice movement building more than 20 years ago through youth organizing as part of my own quest for identity as an Arab American. Right after college in 1994, I started doing racial justice organizing with African American, Mexican, Puerto Rican, and Palestinian youth in Chicago. A decade after that, I joined Californians for Justice in Long Beach, and there I spent almost 9 more years in statewide youth organizing for racial justice and education. When I moved from Chicago to Southern California, I was searching for a sense of community and physical activity. So in 2005, I started practicing the Afro-Brazilian martial art of capoeira, which has been my central mind, body, spirit practice for more than a decade. Can't say I'm a master yet, but I have a decade of experience. Over the past 10 years, aside from doing an occasional capoeira workshop at a youth organizing retreat, my youth organizing practice and my capoeira practice have largely been separate and parallel practices. So for me, it was like getting a gift when I got a deeper introduction to the mind-body practice of forward stance. And that happened when I joined the Movement Strategy Center team in 2013, and actually went through a 2-year intensive Art of War study group in Los Angeles, led by the Zen master and Native Hawaiian nation builder, Norma Wong. To me, forward stance brilliantly brought the two worlds of movement building and physical movement together. A big part of the power of forward stance is accessibility and simplicity as a mind-body approach, and a spiritual approach, if you want it, to social justice movement building. Since being trained as a novice forward stance trainer 2 years ago, I've been able to hit the ground running and integrate the practices into work with hundreds of youth leaders and youth organizers across California. The appetite and motivation that I've seen young people demonstrate to reconnect mind and body and physically practice together is quite impressive. And I'll be sharing more details about forward stance later in the webinar. But today's a session about embodiment, and we need to do some embodiment together. So I actually want to invite us right now to collectively reconnect with our bodies, and we're going to engage in a brief forward stance practice. This will focus on breath, stance, and awareness. I'm gonna model the practice sitting down, and Mimi has graciously offered to model it standing up. So if you need a reference point, you can look to either of us. If you're able to and you'd like to, right now you can stand up, or you can remain seated. To get into a forward stance or a 60-40 stance position, when you're standing, make sure your feet are hip width apart with a slight bend in your knees, so don't lock out your knees. Leaning slightly forward, you put more weight in front than in behind. So roughly 60% of your weight should be leaning towards the front with more weight on the balls of your feet. You don't want to feel as you're about to fall forward. It's more about being physically ready to move. This is a forward-facing, proactive stance. If you're sitting down, you can also get into a forward stance. So we want to move forward to the edge of our chairs so that our backs are away from the back of our chair, with our feet firmly planted on the floor. So we're in our stance. Now we want to get into awareness of the visual field. So keeping your eyes open, lift your gaze to the horizon. The horizon is your own eye level. You've been looking at your computer screen. Take a moment to look up from your computer screen. If you want to, you can minimize the Zoom screen, or you can keep it up to watch Mimi. And I want you to look all the way out in front of you, and without moving your eyes, you're going to broaden your gaze to see the far corners of your eyes. So Mimi's going to demonstrate. You want to be able to still face the horizon and be aware of your peripheral vision. Next, we're going to come into awareness of our feet planted on the ground and on our breath. We want to slow down to a steady breathing that doesn't feel too rushed, nor so slow that it disrupts your breathing and you feel like you're catching your breath. We're going to breathe in and out slowly. Focus the energy of our breath downwards below our navels. You can see Mimi demonstrating the flow of breath in and out. If it helps, you can place your hand a couple of inches below your belly button and follow your in-breath as deep as your core. And then slowly, as you exhale, release the breath from low in your core all the way out. And we'll keep the focus on breathing low and slow. At your own pace, we'll take 3 more low and slow breaths. Follow the in-breath as you remain grounded and extend the breath out. So breathe in, deep and low. And breathe out, long and slow. Again, inhale. And exhale. And last time, inhale deeply. And exhale slowly, letting it all go. Thank you. So I want us to notice any observations, physical, mental, that you're having after these deep focused breaths and forward stance. Mimi, if you want to share anything, what you're noticing.
Well, as I went, my breath went lower and lower. And I hope you all weren't following me at the beginning when my breath was faster. So that was helpful. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah. So this practice of breathing low and slow in a forward stance, and forward stance, like we demonstrated, can be standing or sitting. It's a simple practice you can call upon anytime to reconnect with your body, become grounded, and embody your purpose in a given context. And we'll be sharing more resources on the practice of stance, breath, and awareness that's available to you. Today's webinar focuses on deep embodiment of movement practices. The change that we want to see requires a radical shift in our relationships to one another. In that context, how do we embody the qualities of our vision and values? The commitment and practice of beloved community is central to our vision for a transformed future. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s framework of a revolution of values is alive in this sense of beloved community and transformation. But sometimes we can default to beloved community as people being nice or friendly when we're actually talking about taking on injustice as part of the practice of care and love. I want to share a quote from Dr. King that embodies this sense. Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power, correcting everything that stands against love. In this sense, beloved community is an ongoing practice. It's not always easy. It's not necessarily simple and straightforward. And I wanted to share a personal experience with the struggle to build and practice beloved community through my work as part of the youth organizing team at Movement Strategy Center. 3 years ago, the California Endowment asked our team to take on the task of coordinating Sons and Brothers Camp, which is a week-long summer leadership camp for about 100 boys and young men of color from across California, building the movement to dismantle the school-to-prison and deportation pipeline. From the beginning, given the somewhat exclusive focus on boys and young men, I had misgivings about leading the project. From my experience in 2 decades of racial justice youth organizing, we always engaged youth of all gender identities and often elevated the leadership of girls and young women of color and LGBTQ youth. The generation of racial justice organizing that I grew up in has been rooted in third world feminist recognition of multiple forms of oppression. If we truly want liberation and racial justice, we also got to address gender justice and take on the multiplicity of oppression. So coordinating a camp exclusively for boys and men came with something of a challenge. In addition, we were brought into a project with multiple partners who had been working together on the camp for 2 years. And these were partners with fairly different worldviews and different understandings of racial and gender justice. The Movement Strategy Center team was clear: if we were going to coordinate the camp as a loving space for all the young men who showed up, there would need to be a clear commitment to gender justice across the board. Embodying and practicing this commitment to gender justice as a beloved community has definitely brought its challenges. Our team pushed a value and practice of radical inclusion to ensure that gender nonconforming, trans and queer boys and young men, undocumented youth, and systems impacted youth participated and were physically present, embodied at the camp in critical numbers. This margins to center practice, in particular the focus on queer and trans youth, brought some pushback and defensive stance from partners whose focus has been more on manhood development. And then personally, it was challenging for me to step into my own power in the situation, as some of the partners are also several decades my elder and have many more years working specifically with boys and men of color. Our team's regular forward stance practice, recentering and embodying our proactive gender justice stance, and then a couple of lifeline email questions to Norma Wong definitely helped us move forward. We also brought partners from Brown Boy Project and the Genders and Sexualities Alliance more centrally into the leadership of the camp, especially to take the lead on sessions for adult mentors and youth around gender justice and redefining masculinity. This too was met with some resistance, criticism, and defensive stance. But over the past 3 years, this struggle to embody beloved community has opened up much more space for queer, trans, gender nonconforming, straight, and cisgender boys and young men of color alike to all show up as their full selves. The struggle to practice beloved community in this context is far from over. My personal commitment is to ensure that Sons and Brothers Camp much more clearly addresses the responsibilities of boys, men, and masculine identified folks to challenge patriarchy and misogyny and their impact on girls, women, and feminine identified folks. So what does it look like to embody liberation and equity? Let's wrestle with that question for a second. As I shared in my experience with Sons and Brothers Camp and the defensive stances that arose in the struggle over deep inclusion, our individual and movement patterns of behavior unintentionally reinforce oppression. Where are we numb to those patterns of behavior and their impacts? And what practices can help us move more boldly to embody liberation? We can actually view embodying liberation as providing physical and transformative practices for all of us to move beyond survival mode, which often shows up as unconscious habits, and pivot into practices of thriving. In this definition, habits cut us off from our power. They keep our energy and power locked into unconscious patterns. Apologies for the siren in the background. In movement building, those habits can hold us back from creating the impact we want to have. They can constrain us and create vulnerabilities in our strategy. As we learn from forward stance, it's often easier to notice how habits show up in the body and then translate those to movement habits. For example, if I have a physical habit of contracting a muscle as a reaction to a perceived threat, I don't have access to the full power of that muscle. If you know anything about capoeira, for example, if I have a habit of tensing up when a kick is coming towards me, I might actually get hit by that kick instead of flexibly moving out of the way. These habits might have formed as a survival strategy that once had value for me, but if we get stuck into the habit, it won't serve us fully. On the other hand, conscious practices unlock our capacity. Practice is about taking small, immediate steps to nurture shifts that are larger than we might even be able to imagine possible. We can think about athletes, musicians, practicing every day, practicing their scales, practicing their drills, and over a period of time, that creates much bigger impacts and shifts. That idea of conscious practice can be applied in other areas of life, allowing us to cultivate new qualities and capacities, and also interrupt ingrained habits, even when we are unsure or unclear about our future. Practice allows us to leverage our power. I want to share a little bit about forward stance, a little more detail. So forward stance is a mind-body approach to movement building, and we use the physical experience to develop, explore, and demonstrate human actions. It emphasizes proactive, strategic action and draws from sustainable energy in a constantly changing environment. So you can imagine how useful in this current crazy, constantly changing environment a forward stance is. Forward stance was developed collaboratively by Norma Wong and Forward Together to support movement organizations and leaders to embody radical change. It's a mind-body practice used to change the ways that our movements can often only be conceptual. And it's a movement adaptation of 60-40 stance, which is a technology and curriculum developed by Norma Wong with the Applied Zen program of the Institute of Zen Studies. And we call it 60-40 stance because 60% of our body energy and our body is leaning forward. It's actually a common stance in many martial arts. We don't call it this in capoeira, but we're in forward stance when we're playing capoeira. It's a stance where we're in a state of readiness and we're able to take action while maintaining a strong sense of our own center. I want to share 4 key principles of forward stance. So as we practiced together today, stance is the first element of forward stance, the first principle. That's about our physical orientation to the world and also to what we want to see. Often our movements are defensive and protective, right? Forward stance is proactive, offensive, moves from core strength, offensive in the sense of taking action. And you can think of it as moving from yes instead of no. The second principle is energy. We know that transformative movement building requires immense energy. Forward stance calls on energy that is restorative and can propel us to act and attract what we want depending on the situation. It's strong, active energy that rallies people. The third principle is rhythm, which is about the overall pacing. And we know in our movement work, whether it's movements to end gender-based violence, movements around climate change and climate justice, movements around the school to prison pipeline, we can get on a pace that's not always sustainable. And our movements need a sustainable rhythm. And that includes varied paces and restorative pauses to maintain a 60-40 stance. The fourth principle is awareness. That's about the perception of ourselves as individuals and our movements, the broader world. And that perception is important for right action. We need to cultivate broad and non-reactive awareness, objective awareness that sees the bigger picture. So we might ask, what do physical practice, 60-40 stance, other practices from martial arts or Zen roots, what does that have to do with transformative movement building? We wanted to share a quote from Alicia Garza, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, that brings this connection home. Collective transformative practice is not some hippy-dippy thing. It's about how we are together and how we are successful as movements. This is how Black Lives Matter thinks about transformative practice. It's about transformative relationship building. It's about practice as ritual. So I want to invite us to, we practiced a little bit together today and imagine how, and think about how we embody physically and in our movement that transformative relationship building. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Mimi.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Really appreciate the physical way that you introduced that to us. And this is not at all a theoretical thing. The kind of energy that is needed in this moment to move the world and this country to a new place is immense. And we need not just this part of us, but our whole bodies and all of us to generate that kind of energy. So next, I would like to introduce two amazing movement builders who are using all of themselves and bringing out all of the movements that they're connected with to make big change in the world. And I would like to introduce Nan. She is Nan Stoops. She is the executive director of the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And she has been working with a group of state-based and national coalitions addressing domestic violence and sexual assault. She's working with them to explore how to activate a movement-building orientation to her work. So Nan, you've spoken about how important the notion of beloved community is to you and your networks. What does beloved community mean to you, and how have you worked to activate beloved community in your work?
Thanks, Mimi. Hi, everyone. You know, I think that the notion of beloved community came to life fairly early on in my experience with the first cohort of the Move to End Violence. And we talked about beloved community in kind of a bigger context of living and working in beloved communities that deeply value all women and girls to the last girl. And when we began to articulate that, I had a very deep kind of connection to it from the standpoint of the field in which I work, which is this very massive, wonderful field of domestic violence and sexual violence, primarily services providers, but folks who are very much committed to ending gender-based violence, and people for whom relationships, for better and for worse, are central to all we do and all that we care about. And I would say that the ways in which we have our relationships with each other are sometimes not beloved community. That we have come to a place where often our relationships are transactional, they're goal-oriented, and they're not relationships in which we can really, I think, move to the bold edges of what we believe is possible. So I began to think, you know, that we have all these questions that are confronting us, and that if we're to be able to pursue the answers to these questions, and if we're to really be able to imagine the biggest vision possible, that we would need to be able to practice in beloved community with each other, that we would need to be the change we seek, that we would need to develop new ways of being with one another. And so this idea of actually embodying a beloved community has become, I think, has grabbed people in a really interesting way. It's happened quickly, a little bit surprisingly, I think, and yet has had very deep meaning for me and for the folks that I work with.
Thank you, Nan. And was there a time when the changes you're making, the pivots that you are trying to make in your work went from concept to something that you can actually physically feel?
Yeah, I've been thinking about when my Move to End Violence cohort went to India, and we had spent quite a bit of time in the Mahatma Gandhi Museum. We had opportunities to meet with people and to really experience the ways in which Gandhi, the life of Gandhi, his beliefs, his philosophy, his practice had a tremendous influence on people that live there today. And when we were preparing to make this trip, we had asked our hosts in India what we should do to study and to prepare. And the kind of funny thing was that they told us that we should all watch the movie Gandhi, the movie that had Ben Kingsley playing Gandhi. And regardless of what one thinks about Ben Kingsley being cast in that role, we all watched it. And so I remember us sitting together, in this field, and the scene from the movie came to me, which was a scene in which Gandhi is getting ready for his march to the sea, and he looks at his wife, and then he turns and he begins to walk. And so that pivot made, like, I just had this thought of, if I, with all the questions that I have about the work that we're doing, if I turned and walked, would anyone come with me? And so I just left that experience in India with a commitment that I needed to turn. And so I started asking people questions, and lo and behold, many people wanted to turn. And so the point of that is not that I did anything or that I asked a question, but it was about how many people were ready and wanted to do that. And so we have turned, many of us, and we are walking and realizing what a tremendous pivot is needed in order to keep going, and what the practices might be that are going to take us to our destination.
Thank you, Nan. The readiness that you've tapped into is palpable and is inspiring so many other folks in different movements. So thank you. So working with the concepts of habits and practice and pivots, how do you work with those concepts? And in not just in concepts, but just how does that manifest in your work? What impact has this had for you, your coalition, and the work you are leading beyond your coalition?
Yeah, I think the notion of habits has really taken hold with folks, and particularly when we're talking about in our work to end violence, when we're talking about survival habits. And for those of us who work with people who have been harmed and people who harm, the survival habits that we see are palpable, and the ways actually in which we also exhibit them are quite evident. So we've spent quite a bit of time looking at our own tendencies to act from places of reactivity, of scarcity, of competition, of this kind of ambivalent power, of stress and overwork and breathlessness, and with the knowledge that those are habits, and that they are habits that we can change, and that we must change if we're going to actually get to where we want to be. So the whole habits thing is huge for us, and people seem rejuvenated by the notion that there could be practices that are actually fun. They're not impossible. They're things that we can do together. They're things that we can do individually, and they're things that we can do at the organizational level and at the movement-wide level, and that they are things that we must do with new partners and new friends.
Thank you so much, Nan. I love how you and the person who I'm about to introduce, Cristy, just bring a humility and spirit to all this that is about practicing. And you and many other folks are able to hold it lightly and be able to fall and pick yourselves back up, and really appreciate that kind of spirit. Thank you, Nan. So next, we want to introduce a colleague in the movement to end gender-based violence, Cristy. Cristy Chung has many years of experience working to address violence through cross-cultural service delivery, community mobilization, and creating environments that are inclusive across race, gender, and sexuality in social services and education. Cristy recently initiated a process to explore how transformation and liberation can connect. So Cristy, tell us about how you were introduced to transformative practices and what you learned from them.
Hi, everyone. So, gosh, it's been 5 years now since I met Norma Wong, and that's when I was introduced to Forward Stance plus Transformation. And it was there that I started to learn a little bit more about Forward Stance and breathing, and what that looked like in my life. And right away, I felt this connection to the practice. I was very curious about how I could apply it. And I started to see how it could help me show up differently, and how it could shift my approach. I've been doing this work for many, many years in the movement to end gender-based violence, and I've been through many different organizations, challenging, organizations with challenging organizational dynamics. Some difficult leadership transitions in multiple organizations. And honestly, there are times when I just want to run the opposite direction. And I felt like this practice of Forward Stance was starting to really give me a sense of how I might show up differently. I started to look at what 60-40 stance meant, so how to not be in my attacking mode or my run away, I'm gonna hide mode, but to really be in my strength and my power, to really understand and strengthen my core, to start to deepen my practice around radical self-care and self-love. I started to look at what my purpose was, and to really look at what habits I was having. How was I showing up in ways that I unconsciously was continuing to practice habits that were not serving me well. And so I knew that I needed and wanted to really dive into a regular transformation practice. in my life. And so things as simple as breathing, like we did with Jeremy today, are not always so simple when you're like racing and you've got urgency in your life and you're trying to get a million things done and you feel like, you know, there's a lot of really important work to get done and get done now. But those are like breathing is one of the things that really helped me stop and to really just start to breathe low and slow and help me find my center and find clarity. I actually could like think about and strategize and take action in different ways. I started to use 60-40 stance to help me prepare for and actually be in very difficult conversations, places where I had very little power and yet had the potential for huge influence in how we moved forward and how we did things. And I also started to really invest in my own Tai Chi practice, the 10-step Tai Chi practice that Norma teaches, because it helped me shift my energy and show up strong and centered in those moments when I really wanted to just shut down or give up. So I feel like I kind of just dove in head first or feet first, all in. And I feel like that's been huge for me to really show up differently.
Thank you, Cristy. Thank you for breaking it down. It's very simple, yet not so simple. So thank you. So how did you begin to connect these kinds of transformative practices and liberation?
So, you know, I, like most of my work life, I have been in the movement to end gender-based violence. I've been working primarily in Asian Pacific Islander organizations that focus on working in communities of color, working with immigrant refugee communities and queer communities. And so I feel like I don't know how to do this work around ending gender-based violence without really having a racial and gender justice lens. But I also know that there are many places in our movement that that's not true. And I think it's a real source of tension in our movement. So at some point during my Move to End Violence experience, it became really clear to our cohort that it was important for us to intentionally center race and really look at race and gender justice together at that intersection. And so we dove into the dynamics of race, equity, power, privilege, and what that was looking like both in our movement and in the world. And I really saw us make a commitment together to really center race and gender justice. During that time, I also experienced a struggle and learn together to heal and invest in different kinds of conversations, to build and commit to our relationships with one another in a completely different way. And then to really, because of that work that we did together, to build a foundation for us to jump off of. And it was in that moment of having built the foundation and starting to shift that I saw what a powerful shift we were able to make as we centered race in our strategies, our approaches, and our conversations. And so I really saw, and those two things, I felt like I was practicing separately, in some ways. So I was practicing my transformative practices in my organizational work. And I was doing race, equity, and liberation work in a separate place. And it's then that I started to kind of see, oh, wait, these are, the transformative practices are actually helping me take a forward stance and show up differently. And it was that ability to connect to my own strengths, to have the courageous conversations that I knew needed to be had in a compassionate way, to really lead with my heart and with love, and to value and prioritize the relationships that were important to me in my life. and to really center my commitment to equity and liberation in a way that invites others to join me.
Thank you, Cristy. Yeah. Was there more you wanted to say?
Well, I was just going to say, you know, when I'm in a room and we're talking about racial justice, I can feel the energy shift when we start to integrate embodied practices. You know, there can be tension in the room, there can be struggle happening, and yet when we stop to breathe together, when we start to really bring together our mind and body, and sometimes spirit, there's a palpable energy shift in the room. And we can get to a deeper place and have a different kind of conversation and really still build a strong, beloved community that is able and willing to really have radical love with each other, meaning that we can love each other and be in relationship and still have those hard conversations.
Thank you, Cristy. Really appreciate your concreteness about how we can embody different ways of being, and also how that really impacts the conversation and the impact that you're actually trying to, and we are trying to make in the world. Thank you so much. So I would like to call Nan and Jeremy back up, and we are going to be taking questions from the folks on the webinar. So you can use your chat function or the Q&A function to ask questions, and we will be pulling them up. We have about 10 minutes or so for Q&A. So one of the questions that came up from the audience was how to work with inner fears, anger during trauma and turmoil, and want to bring in the moment that we're in now. This moment has been one that just reading the news can trigger very visceral reactions. So in this historical moment, what are ways to work with and those kinds of inner fears, and then what's happening and erupting for many people? What are practices you use to ground yourself in these moments?
Go ahead, Jeremy.
No, go ahead, Cristy. Go ahead.
So I could start. When I have a daily practice of breathing and do my Tai Chi, I can handle those times that when I know I'm going to be triggered in a different way. And so then I also know that when those times are happening, I'm also super gentle with myself and know that I have to make sure that I have spaciousness in my day. And then one of the things that I love about that Norma says, is that it's even just 15 minutes of spaciousness a day can help us manage and deal with all of the kind of the depth in which we're impacted by what's happening in the world right now.
Folks,
I was gonna share something very similar. So it's a practice, right? To sort of not let fear or the shakes or anger take over you. For me, I think like a key place. So I have 3 kids, 10 and 5 and 18 months. So turmoil of some order is kind of like par for course, especially like in the mornings, getting ready to go. And so that's an area of like struggle for practice for me. Like, how do I not subside to like anger or anxiousness in those contexts? And like Cristy, I really go back to some of Norma's teachings. And I think as Cristy shared, one is like, whatever your practice is, do it in moments of calm, so you can build that muscle memory and that cellular memory around that grounded practice. And if you have a regular practice, whether it's forward stance or breath or awareness of your breath, and you can get it to the point where it's your default, then it really is easier to call upon it in times of turmoil and trauma and conflict. And then just another piece of that I'm still working with is this, like, practicing being present with the emotion, whether it's fear, anger, not trying to push it away, and also not letting it take over you. So, but like Cristy said, I think carving out that time each day to do mindful practice is really is the key.
Great. And go ahead, Nan.
Well, I was just going to say also that that a really natural kind of response is to kind of, you know, shut down and close in, and that you know, if we can at least kind of breathe into staying open, you know, and keeping our vision forward, and remembering that the we is so much bigger. It actually is so much bigger right now than the thing, than what's out there. And so to connect with others who are the we, you know, and to be with them, and to know that we actually are going to prevail, you know, in this current thing, you know, like, we just have to believe that, and know that it's true. So just staying open, right? Staying as big and as powerful and as forward moving as we can be, and practicing that in the moments when we don't have to be it, so that it's there when we need it.
Thanks, everyone. So we have just time for maybe a couple questions. I have one that, so can you give examples and stories of embodied practices that you use with groups who, to help them shift away from tension? Ones who may have experienced trauma might not feel very open to these practices. What specific practices have you done to shift and help them build momentum and vision and to shift that dynamic?
Well, okay. So, I mean, I think one thing is this idea that, you know, when we're practicing in groups, whether it's breathing or Tai Chi or walking together or whatever the activity might be, that it's fine for people to do it however is comfortable for them. That we don't all have to do it in the same way, at the same pace. You know, we just don't. That the important thing is to try, and to be able to feel like you're a part of something bigger. And I have found that kind of permissiveness and forgiveness is very helpful, and not just for people who are struggling, but, you know, for all of us. It's a little bit different, and it's such a relief, you know, such a relief.
Other folks, concrete practices, concrete things you've seen shift energy.
So I have a story just from last week. So the team, the youth organizing team that I'm part of at Movement Strategy Center, there's about 10, 11 of us on the team. A mix of feminine identified folks and women, masculine identified folks and men, and gender non-conforming folks. And we had a session, a conversation on gender justice, similar to like racial justice in the gender context. And some very real tensions and conflicts in a really good and powerful, but also challenging way came up around on our own team, like how are some of us, particularly the men, defaulting to patriarchy or, you know, patriarchal patterns of behavior in our work. And somebody was with us as a guest who also practices physical practice. You know, she invited, she's like, why don't we had this conversation, we're going to come back together, let's just practice some breath with movement together. And we have been doing it throughout the day, kind of at program times, but that invitation to just, hey, we know how to do this together. Like we said, we practice together in times of calm. So there's a little time of conflict. So let's take some time and practice breath with movement together, really simply, maybe 2 minutes. And it's not like it was erasing the conflicts, but it diffused some of the muscle tension and just emotional tension. So then I think we were just able to be much more open and receptive with each other. So that's a real concrete example from last week.
Yeah, and I'm going to open this to Cristy, but also if any of you actually want to physically show us what you did or demonstrate, please do so we can know. So want to open it up to if Cristy has some words, and
yeah,
if anyone wants to show us too.
Can I show you? I don't know if I'm brave enough to show you. I'll say that I have found sound to be one of the, because you can feel the resonance. So when you're using sound in a group, and we often will do vowels. And so when we're doing vowels together, we'll do ah together. There's a way in which people it kind of breaks through some of what, it interrupts sometimes what we're getting stuck in, or a habit that might be showing up, and to find resonance with the rest of the group so that we can move forward together in a different way. And so that brings me to habits and practices. I feel like habits and practices are a huge piece that I use in groups, where we actually think about what are the habits, kind of what you were talking about, Jeremy, like what are the habits that are showing up right now? And what are the practices that we might be able to really help start to practice together so we can interrupt those habits, and especially if there are things that are ways in which we're reacting or overreacting to things, and it's just like an automatic response. So those are two like really specific things that I use. And then the last one I would say is storytelling, which is I think a really powerful way of using our voices to get to who we are and connect in our relationships with each other, and to really to connect human to human, right? So we're actually sharing our stories and who we are in those moments, and it's okay that we are going to struggle together. That's all right.
Well, I can take a second to show what we did last Friday. I'll try to do it here so folks can see. And I think I was sharing, like, part of it was like we were at a point where there was tension, so maybe we were like sitting in our chairs and our bodies are kind of tight and we're just like looking at each other. So it's pretty simple. The way that Mimi was when we were breathing, following the breath with the hands. But this one is to come bigger and with openness. So you can do this on your own in the morning, in the evening, or you can do it in a group. And it's as you inhale, you bring your hands all the way up for a deep inhale. And then for the exhale, you're going to bring your hands all the way around and cross them in front. And then the inhale is going to be a circular inhale on this one. So inhale all the way up. And then when you exhale, you push the breath out and down. And so those are like 4 very, very simple motions that, done with a group, to me, just brings some physical openness, some awareness, and there's rhythm. So that's one that we use really simply, and it doesn't take a lot to learn it.
Thank you all so much. Deep appreciation for all 3 of you who, being brave enough to show and also just try these out in groups. This is not often physical practice or just bringing all of ourselves and trying to align with our values. That's unfortunately not always the case in our work. And so thank you for being, you all and the communities, the many, many communities that are on this webinar that you all are connected to, for being brave enough to bring all of yourselves to this work and working to embody and practice embodying. We're not going to get it perfect at all. So practicing, being willing to make mistakes as we do this. We are just about at the end of our time together, and really want to appreciate all 3 of you for taking the time to share your wisdom and stories. And as we mentioned earlier, this is the 3rd in a series of 6 webinars on transformative movement building. And it's presented by Movement Strategy Center and the Move to End Violence. Today's session focused on embodiment And the next webinar will focus on the key elements of transformative movements, connection and community. Please join us on Tuesday, November 15th, and visit www.movetoendviolence.org for more details and to register. There's also a couple of practice guides that were featured on today's call. Movement building practice, stance, breath, and awareness. And you can go to the website to both look at to request the link for the recording of this webinar, as well as to download those simple practices that you can bring into your community. And finally, we would love to hear your feedback. So please let us know. We want to be sure to learn and improve upon these webinars, and we'd love to hear how this connected. We have a short feedback form that you can access in the chat box, and also the link will come to you by email. So thank you again to everyone who joined this webinar. Thank you all panelists, and thank you so much to the folks who are making this webinar happen. Jovita, Emily, Chelsea, many other people that made sure this webinar could come together. Deep, deep, deep appreciation. Thank you all for joining, and join us again November 15th. It will be a very different, we'll see what kinds of, what state our country will be in. Excited to connect with all of you November 15th to see where we are at. Thank you so much, and have a great day.